Today we're going to be reading the Communist Manifesto. I bought a copy of it online. My computer's not really that live, so I'm not gonna be able to really respond. So let's go. Let's start. Alright. So we're gonna start off with Manifesto of the Communist Party, first page. So let's begin. A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise the spectre. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies. Whereas the party in opposition that has not been decried as communistic by its opponents in power, whereas the opposition that has not been held back by the branding epoch of communism against the more advanced opposition parties as well as its reactionary advisories. Two things that result from this fact. One, communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be itself a power. Two, it is high time that communists should openly, in the face of the whole world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery table of spectre of communism with a manifesto of the party itself. To this end, communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto to be published in English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish languages. Alright. Alright. Oh. I need to know that people can see the stream first. Alright. So let's continue. Alright. You guys ready for this? We're gonna start the Alright, let's go. The history of all hitherto existing societies is a history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and countryman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight. A fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstitution of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold gradation of social rank. In ancient Rome, we have patricians, knights, plebeians, and slaves. In the Middle Ages, feudal lords, vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, serfs. In almost all of these classes, again, subordinate gradations. The modern bourgeois society that has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society has not done away with class antagonisms. It has but established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in the place of old ones. Our epoch, the epoch of the bourgeoisie, I can't pronounce it right, possesses, however, this distinctive feature. It has simplified the class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes, directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. Jeez. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chartered burghers of the earliest towns. From these burgesses, the first elements of the bourgeoisie were developed. The discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opened up fresh ground for the rising bourgeoisie. The East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade of the colonies, increased the means of exchange and in commodities generally, gave to commerce, to navigation, to industry, an impulse never before seen. Never before known, and thereby to the revolutionary element in the tottering feudal society, a rapid development. The feudal system of industry, under which industrial production was monopolized by closing guilds, now no longer sufficed for for the growing wants of the new markets. The manufacturing system took its place. The guild masters were pushed on one side by the manufacturing middle class. Division of labour between different corporate guilds vanished in face of division of labour in each single workshop. Meantime, the markets kept ever growing, the demand ever rising. Even manufacture no longer sufficed. Thereupon, steam and machinery revolutionized industrial production. The place of manufacture was taken by the giant, modern industry. The place of the whole industrial middle class by industrial millionaires, the leaders of whole industrial armies, the modern bourgeois. Modern industry has established a world market for which the discovery of America has paved the way. This market has given an immense development to commerce, to navigation, to communication by land. This development has, in its time, reacted on the extension of the industry, and in proportion as industry, commerce, navigation, railways extended, in the same proportion as the bourgeois developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. We see, therefore, how the modern bourgeois is itself the product of a long course of development, of a series of revolutions in the modes of production and exchange. Each step in the development of the bourgeois was accompanied by a corresponding political advance of that class, an oppressed class under the sway of the feudal nobility, an armed, self-governing association in the medieval commune. Here, independent urban republic, as in Italy and Germany, their taxable third estate of the monarchy, as in France, afterwards, in the period of manufacture proper, serving either the semi-feudal or the absolute monarchy as a counterpoise against the nobility, and in fact, cornerstone of the great monarchies in general. The bourgeois has at last, since the establishment of modern industry and of the world market, conquered for itself. In the modern representative state, exclusive political sway, the executive of the modern state, but is a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeois. The bourgeois, historically, has played a most revolutionary part. The bourgeois, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the remotely feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than colour's cash payment. It has drowned most of the heavenly ecstasies of religious fervour, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism. In the icy water of egotistical calculation, it has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless and indefeasible chartered freedoms, has set up that single unconsolable freedom, free trade. In the one word, for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. The bourgeois has stripped off its halo of every occupation hitherto honoured and looked up to with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wage labourers. The bourgeois has torn away the family from a sentimental veil and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. The bourgeois has disclosed how it came to pass that in the display of vigour in the Middle Ages, which reactionists so much admire, found a fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. It has been the first to show what man's activity can bring about. It has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expeditions that put into shade all former exoduses of nations and crusades. The bourgeois cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production and thereby the relations of production. Modes of production in altered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguished the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast-frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away. All new formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned. And all man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. The need of constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeois all over the whole surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. The bourgeois has, through its exploitation of the world market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionists, it has drawn from under the feet of industry the national ground on which it stood. All old established national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations. By industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones. Industries whose products are consumed, not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old ones satisfied by the productions of the country, we find new wants, requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. In the place of the old local and natural seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal independence of nations, as a material, so an intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations became common property. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible, and from the numerous national and local literatures, there arises a world literature. The bourgeois, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations, into civilization. The cheap prices of its commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls, with which it forces the barbarians' intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. It compels all nations, on pain of extinction, to adopt the bourgeois mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, i.e. to become bourgeois themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. The bourgeois has subjected the country to the rule of the towns, it has created enormous cities, has greatly increased the urban population as compared with the rural, and has thus rescued a considerable part of the population from the idiocy of rural life. Just as it made the country dependent on the towns, so it has made barbarian and semi-barbarian countries dependent on the civilized ones. Nations of peasants on nations of bourgeois, the east and the west. The bourgeois keeps more and more doing away with the scattered state of the population, of the means of production and of property. It has agglomerated production and has concentrated property in a few hands. The necessary consequence of this was political centralization. Independent or loosely connected provinces, where separate interests, laws, governments, and systems of taxation became lumped together into one nation, with one government, one code of laws, one national class interest, one frontier, and one customs tariff. The bourgeois, during its rule of scarce 100 years, have created more massive and more colossal productive forces than all preceding generations together. Subject of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation. I'm running out of breath. Canalization of rivers, whole population conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had a presentiment that productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labour? We see then the means of production and of exchange, on whose foundation the bourgeois built itself up, were generated in feudal society at a certain stage in the development of these means of production and of exchange, the conditions in which under feudal society produce and exchange. The feudal organization of agriculture and produce and exchange, the feudal organization of agriculture and manufacturing industry, in one word, the feudal relations of property became no longer compatible with the already developed productive forces. They became so many fetters. They had to be burst asunder. They were burst asunder. Into their place stepped free competition, accompanied by a social and political constitution adapted to it, and by the economic and political sway of the bourgeois class. A similar movement is going on before our own eyes. Modern property, a society that is conjured up with such gigantic means of production and of exchange, is like the sorcerer, who is no longer able to control the powers of neither the world whom he has called up his spells. For many a decade past the history of industry and commerce, but is the history of revolt of modern productive forces. I should have just read this by myself. Against modern conditions of production, against the property relations that are the rule conditions for existence of the bourgeois and of its rule. It is enough to mention the commercial crisis that their periodical return put on its trial, each time more threateningly, the existence of the entire bourgeois society. In these crises, a great part not only of the existing products, but also of the previously created productive forces are periodically destroyed. In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that, in all earlier epochs, was seen as an absurdity. The epidemic of overproduction. Society suddenly finds itself put back into a state of momentary barbarism. It appears as if a famine, a universal war of devastation that cut off the supply of every means of substance, industry, and commerce, seemed to be destroyed. And why? Because there's too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry, too much commerce. The productive forces at disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions of the bourgeois property. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions, by which they are fettered, and soon they overcome these fetters. They bring disorder into the whole bourgeois society, and endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to compromise the wealth created by them. And how does the bourgeois get over these crises? On the one hand, enforce destruction of the mass productive forces, on the other by the conquest of new markets and having more thorough exploitation of the old ones. That is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. The weapons which the bourgeois felled feudalism to the ground are now turned against the bourgeois itself. But not only has the bourgeois forged the weapons that bring death to itself, it is also called into existence the men who are to wield those weapons, the modern working class, the proletarians. In proportion as the bourgeois, i.e. capital, is developed in the same class of labourers who only so long as they find work, and who find work are only so long as their labour increases capital. These labourers, who must sell themselves piecemeal, are a commodity, like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition, to all the fluctuations in the market. Owing to extensive use of machinery and division of labour, the work of proletarians has been lost all individual character, and consequently all charm for the workman. He becomes an appendage of the machine, and is only the most simple, most monotonous, and the most easily acquired knack is required of him. Hence the cost of production of a workman is restricted almost entirely to the means of subsistence that he requires for his maintenance and for the propagation of his race. But the price of commodity, and therefore also of labour, is equal to its cost of production. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the work increases, the wage decreases. Nay more, in proportion as the use of machinery and division of labour increases, in the same proportion the burden of toil also increases, whether by prolongation of the working hours, by increase of the work exacted in a given time, or by increased speed in the machinery, etc. One industry is converted the little workshop of patriarchal master into the great factory of the industrial capitalists. Masses of labourers crowded into the factory are organised like soldiers. As privates of the industrial army, they are placed under command of perfect hierarchy of officers and sergeants. Not only are they slaves of the bourgeois class and of the bourgeois state, they are daily and hourly enslaved by the machine, by the overlooker, above all by the individual bourgeois manufacturer himself. As more openly this despotism proclaims gain to be its end and its aim, the more petty, the more hateful, and the more embittering it is. The less skill and exertion of strength implied in manual labour, in other words, the more modern industry becomes developed, the more the labour of men have subsetted by the women. Differences of age and sex no longer have any distinctive social validity for the working class. All instruments are of labour, more or less expensive to us according to their age and sex. No longer is the exploitation of the labourer by the manufacturer far at an end, that he receives his wage in cash, that he is set upon by the other portions of the bourgeois, the landlord, shopkeeper, the pawnbroker, etc. The lower strata of the middle class, as well as tradespeople, shopkeepers, retired tradesmen generally, handicraftsmen and peasants, all these sink gradually into the proletariat, partly because their diminutive capital does not suffice for the scale on which modern industry is carried on, and are swamped in a competition with the large capitalists, partly because their specialized skill is rendered worthless by the new methods of production. Thus the proletariat is recruited from all classes of the population. A proletariat goes through various stages of development. With its birth begins the struggle with the bourgeois. At first, the contest is carried on by individual labourers, then by the workpeople of a factory, then by the operatives of one trade, in one locally, against the individual bourgeois who directly exploits them. They direct their attacks not against the bourgeois' conditions of production, but against the instruments of production themselves. They destroy imported wares that compete with their labour. They smash to pieces of machinery. They set their factories ablaze. They seek to restore force by the vanished status of the workmen of the Middle Ages. How long has this been going for? I only have one concurrent viewer. How long am I doing this for? 20 minutes? 20 minutes? Okay, no one's viewing anymore. I'm sad. Oh, we got a viewer back. We got someone back. Just... Alright. At this stage, the labourers still form an incoherent mass scattered over the whole country and broken up by their mutual competition. If anyway they unite to form more compact bodies, this is not yet the consequence of their own active union, but of the union of the bourgeois, which class, in order to attain its own political ends, is compelled to set the whole proletariat in motion, and is moreover there for a time able to do so. At this stage, therefore, the proletarians do not fight their enemies, but the enemies of their enemies, the remnants of an absolute monarchy, the landowners, the non-industrial bourgeois, the petty bourgeois. Thus, the whole historical movement is concentrated in the hands of the bourgeois. Every victory so obtained is a victory for the bourgeois. But with the development of industry, what happened? Sorry, I keep on seeing my screen change, so I have to. It's just Google's like, oh, you have weird revolution. You have weird resolution. I can't talk. I'm not even done the first chapter. I'm barely through this. How long till next chapter? Okay, we got page 17. So let's keep on going. I forgot where we are. The one person watching this, what was the last thing? One person watching this, what was like the last thing I was reading? Because I forgot. I'm just gonna go from resolution is weird. Okay, thanks a lot. God fucking damn it, YouTube, can you please just stop recommending me this? I don't care. At this stage, the labourers form an incoherent mass scattered across the whole country and broken up by their mutual competition. If anyway they unite to form more compact bodies, this is not yet the consequence of their active union, but the union of the bourgeois, which class, in order to attain its own political ends, is compelled to set the whole proletariat in motion, is moreover yet to do for a time able to do so. At this stage, therefore, the proletarians do not fight their enemies, but the enemies of their enemies, the remnants of an absolute monarchy, the landowners. Then, you recording this? Are you recording this right now? I don't care if you're recording this, because I have to like post this later. Like, jeez, I don't know why I did this. Hold on. YouTube lets me put users in timeout, like actual timeout. God damn it, YouTube. And stop giving me things about resolution. I don't care. The non-industrial bourgeois, the petty bourgeois. Thus, the whole historical movement is concentrated in the hands of the bourgeois. Every victory so obtained is a victory for the bourgeois. But the development of industry, the proletariat not only increases its number, but it becomes concentrated in greater masses. Its strength grows, and it feels that strength more. So you're gonna chroma key me into some weird video, right? You're gonna chroma key me. I'll have to cut this out when I post this eventually. The various interests and conditions of life within the ranks of the proletariat are more and more equalized in proportion as machinery obliterates all distinctions of labor and nearly everywhere reduces wages to the same low level. The growing competition among the bourgeois and the resulting commercial crises make the wages of the workers ever more fluctuating. The unceasing movement of the machinery, ever more rapidly developing, makes their livelihood more and more precarious. Collisions between individual workmen and individual bourgeois take more and more of the character of collisions between individual workmen and individual bourgeois take more and more of the character collisions between two classes. Thereupon the workers begin to form combinations, trade unions, against the bourgeois. They club together in order to keep up the rate of wages. They found permanent associations in order to make provision beforehand for these occasional revolts. Here and there the contest breaks out into riots. Now and then the workers are victorious, but only for a time. The real fear of their battles lies, not in the immediate result, but in the ever-expanding union of the workers. This union is helped on by improved means of communication that are created by modern industry and that place the workers on different localities in contact with one another. It was just this contact that needed to centralize the numerous local struggles, all of the same character, into one national struggle between classes. But every class struggle is a political struggle, and that union to attain which the burghers of the Middle Ages, with their miserable highways, requires centuries. The modern proletarians, thanks to railways, achieve in a few years. Its organization of the proletarians into a class and consequently into a political party is continually being upset again by the competition between the workers themselves. But ever it rises up again, stronger, firmer, mightier. It compels legislative recognition of the particular interests of the workers by taking advantage of the divisions among the bourgeois itself. Thus the 10 Hours Bill in England was carried. Altogether collisions between the classes of the old society further, in many ways, to cause the development of the proletariat. The bourgeois finds itself involved in a constant battle, at first with the aristocracy, later on with those portions of the bourgeois itself, whose interests have become antagonistic to the progress of industry. At all times, with the bourgeois of foreign countries, in these battles it sees itself compelled to appeal to proletariat, to ask for its help, and thus to drag it into the political arena. The bourgeois itself, therefore, supplies the proletariat with its own instruments of political and general education. In other words, it furnishes the proletariat with weapons for fighting the bourgeois. Further, as we have already seen, entire sections of the ruling classes are, by the events of industry, precipitated into the proletariat, or at least threatened into their conditions of existence. These also supply the proletariat with flesh elements of enlightenment and progress. Finally, in times when the class struggle nears the decisive hour, the process of dissolution going on within the ruling class, in fact within the whole range of society, assumes such a violent, glaring character that a small section of the ruling class cuts itself adrift and joins the revolutionary class, the class that holds the future in its hands, just as, therefore, at an early period, a section of the nobility went over to the bourgeois. So now a portion of the bourgeois goes over to the proletariat, and in particular, a portion of the bourgeois ideologists, who have raised themselves to a level of comprehending theoretically of the historical movement as a whole. Of all the classes that stand face to face with the bourgeois today, this proletariat alone is a really revolutionary class. The other classes decay and finally disappear in the face of modern industry. The proletariat is its special and essential product. The lower middle class, the small manufacturer, shopkeeper, the artisan, the peasant, all these fights against the bourgeois to save from extinction their existence as fractions of the middle class. They are therefore not revolutionary but conservative. Nay, more, they are reactionary, for they try to roll back the wheel of history. If by chance they are revolutionary, they are so only in view of their impending transfer to the proletariat that they defend not their own present, but their future interests. They desert their own standpoint to place themselves at that of the proletariat, the dangerous class of the social scum, the passively rotting mass thrown off by the lowest layers of old society, may here and there be swept into the movement by proletarian revolution. Its conditions of life, however, may prepare it far more for the part of a bribed tool to reactionary intrigue. In the conditions of the proletariat, those of society at large are already virtually swamped. The proletariat is without property. His reaction to his wife and children no longer has no longer anything in common with the bourgeois family relations, modern industrial labour, modern subjection to capital, same as in England and France, in America as in Germany, has stripped him of every trace of national character. Law, morality, religion are to him as so many bourgeois prejudices, behind which lurk and ambush just as many bourgeois interests. All the preceding classes that got the upper hand sought to fortify their already acquired status by subjecting society at large to their conditions of appropriation. The proletarians became masters of the productive forces of society, except by abolishing their own previous mode of appropriation, and therefore also by every other previous mode of appropriation. They have nothing of their own to secure and to fortify. Their mission is to destroy all previous securities for and insurances of individual property, all previous historical movements or movements of minorities or in the interests of minorities. The proletarian movement is a self-conscious, independent movement of the immense majority. In the interests of the immense majority, the proletariat, the lowest stratum of our present society, cannot raise itself up, without the whole superincumbent strata of official society being strung into the air. They're not in substance yet in form. The struggle of the proletariat with the bourgeois is at first a national struggle. The proletariat of each country must, of course, first of all, settle matters with his own bourgeois. In depicting the most general phases of development of the proletariat, we trace the more or less veiled civil war, raging within existing society, up to the point where that war breaks out into open revolution, where the violent overthrow of the bourgeois lays the foundation for the sway of the proletariat. Hitherto, every form of society has been based, as we've already seen, on the antagonism of oppressing and oppressed classes, but in order to oppress a class, certain conditions must be assured to it under which it can, at least, continue to its lavish existence. The serf, in the period of serfdom, raised himself to membership in the commune, just as the petty bourgeois under the yoke of feudal absolutism managed to develop into a bourgeois. The modern labourer, on the contrary, instead of rising with the progress of industry, sinks deeper and deeper below the conditions of existence of his own class. He becomes a pauper, and pauperism develops more rapidly than population and wealth. And here it becomes evidence that the bourgeois is unfit any longer to be the ruling class in society, and is imposed of conditions of existence upon society as an overriding law. It is unfit to rule because it is incompetent to assure an existence to its slave within its slavery, because it cannot help him letting him sink to such a state that it has to feed him instead of being fed by him. Society can no longer live under this bourgeois. In other words, its existence is no longer compatible with society. The essential condition for the existence and for the sway of the bourgeois class is the formation and augmentation of capital. The condition for capital is wage labour. Wage labour rests exclusively on competition between the labourers. The advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is the bourgeois, replaces the isolation of the labourers due to competition by the revolutionary combination, due to association. The development of the modern industry therefore cuts from under its feet the very foundation on which the bourgeois produces and appropriates products. What the bourgeois therefore produces above all is his own gravediggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. And I'm finished the first chapter of the Communist Manifesto. I'm not going to stop now. I just need to get a drink, so I'm going to be gone for a second. I'm just going to go get a drink. I'll be back in a sec. I'm back with my water. God damn it. That's a hard cap to open. Alright. let's go. Let's go on to the second chapter now. Jeez. This has been a tedious task. It's been It took like 30 minutes to read the first chapter. So let's go on to the second chapter. Chapter 2. Proletarians and Communists. In what relations do the Communists center the proletarians as a whole? The Communists do not form a separate party opposed to the other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mould the proletarian movement. The Communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. In national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. In the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeois has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. The Communists, therefore, are on one hand practically the most advanced and resolute solution of the working class parties of every country. That section which pushes forward all others on the other hand. Theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. The immediate aim of the Communists is the same as that of all other proletarian parties: formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. The theoretical conclusions of the Communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would be universal reformer. They merely express in general terms actual relations springing from an existing class struggle, from a historical movement going on right under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change consequent upon the change in historical conditions. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeois property. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system producing and appropriating products, that's based on class antagonisms, on the exploitation of many by the few. In this sense, the theory of communists may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. We communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor. Basically, summary: they don't want you to own shit. We communists have been man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all freedom, activity, and independence. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of the petty artisan and the small peasant, a form of property that preceded the bourgeois form? There is no need to abolish that. The development of industry has a great extent already destroyed it, and is still destroying it daily. Or do you mean modern bourgeois private property? But does wage labour create any property for labour? Not a bit. It creates capital, i.e. that kind of property which exploits wage labour, and which cannot increase except upon condition of begetting a new supply of wage labour for express exploitation. Property in its present form is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labour. Let us examine both sides of this antagonism. To be a capitalist is to have not only purely personal but a social status and production. Capital is a collective product, and by only the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort only by the united actions of all members of society can be set in motion. Capital is therefore not personal, it is a social power. When therefore capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. It is the only social character of the property that is changed. It loses its class character. Let us now take wage labour. The average price of wage labour is the minimum wage, i.e. that the quantum of the means of subsistence, which is absolutely requisite in bare existence as a labourer. What therefore the wage labourer appropriates by means of his labour is merely suffices to prolong and reproduce the bare existence. We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labour, and appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labour of others. All that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the labourer lives merely to increase capital and is allowed to live only in so far as the interest of the ruling class requires it. I've been doing this for 40 minutes now. I wish I could stop. Average watch time, 9 minutes. Uncle Nate, you've been watching on 2 different accounts. So, I think average view time's 15 minutes probably? Fructose only viewed for a couple minutes. And he left. In bourgeois society, living labour is but a means to increase accumulated labour. In communist society, accumulated labour is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the labourer. In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. And the abolition of the state of things is called by the bourgeois abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. By freedom is meant, under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying, or the other brave words about bourgeois about freedom in general, have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with restricted selling and buying with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communistic abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeois conditions of production, and of the bourgeois itself. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property, but in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, a necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with the intending to do away with your property. Precisely so, that is what we just intend. From the moment when labour can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent, into a social power capable of being monopolised, i.e. from the moment when individual property can be no longer transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from the moment you may say individually vanishes. You may therefore confess by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle class owner of property. This person must, indeed, be swept out of the way and made impossible. God damn. I have 6 more pages till the next chapter. I've been going for almost an hour now. Communist Manifesto, but every time I get thirsty, I take a drink. Jeez, my throat's hurting. Once I finish this, I'm gonna go get a cough drop or something. If you're hearing this, comment beans if you're hearing this right now, okay? Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is deprive him of the power to subjugate the labour of others by means of such appropriation. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal... Let's go till midnight. The thing is only 36 pages long. The Communist Manifesto is only 36 pages long. It's extremely small. Oh frick, I lost my page. All objections urged against the communist mode of producing and appropriating material products have in the same way been urged against the communistic modes of producing and appropriating intellectual products. Just as to the bourgeois, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself, so that disappearance of class culture is to him identical with the disappearance of all culture. That culture, the loss of which he laments, is, for the enormous majority, a mere training to act as a machine. but don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeois property, the standard of your bourgeois notions of freedom, culture, law, etc. Your very ideas are but the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property. Just your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into a law for all, a will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economical conditions of existence of your class. The selfish misconception that induces you to transform into eternal laws of nature and reason, the social forms springing into your present mode and production and form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production, this misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you. What you clearly see in the case of ancient property, what you admit in the case of feudal property, you are of course forbidden to admit the case of your own bourgeois form property. Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare-up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. It is in its incompletely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeois, but the state of things finds its complement among the practical absence of the family among proletarians and in public prostitution. Oh, I shouldn't say that word. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But you will say, we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. And your education, it is not that also social, determined by the social conditions under which you educate, by the intervention, direct or indirect, of society, by means of schools, etc. The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. They do but seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hollowed correlation of parent and child, becomes all the more disgusting, the more by the action of the modern industry. All family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and the children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labour. But you communists would introduce community of women, screams the whole bourgeois in chorus. The bourgeois sees his wife as a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common, and naturally can come to no other conclusion that the lot of being common to all will likewise will fall to the woman. He has not even a suspicion that the real point is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of the production. For the rest, nothing was more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of our bourgeois that the community of women, which they pretend to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women. It has existed almost from time immemorial. Our bourgeois is not content with having the wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, shouldn't say that word, take the great pleasure in seducing each other's wives. This is weird. Bourgeois marriage is in a reality of wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce, in substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system for production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women springing from that system, i.e. of prostitution of both public and private. The communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationality. The working men, since have no country, we cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first acquire all political supremacy, must rise to the leading class in the nation, must constitute itself to the nation. It is so far itself national, though not in the bourgeois sense of the word. National differences and antagonisms between people are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeois, to freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production and the conditions of life corresponding thereto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish farther. United action of the leading civilized countries at last is one of the first conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another is put an end to, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put end to. In proportion of the antagonism between classes within a nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come an end. The charges against communism made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination. This requires deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conceptions in one word, man's consciousness changes with every change in the conditions of his material existence, in his social relations, and his social life. What else does the history of ideas prove? That intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production has changed. The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. When people speak of ideas that revolutionize society, they do express the fact that within the old society, the elements of a new one have been created, and the dissolution of old ideas keeps even pace with the dissolution of the old conditions of existence. When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed in the 18th century to rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the then revolutionary bourgeois. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to the sway of free competition within the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development, but religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survive this challenge. There are besides eternal truths such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society. But communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality, as to constituting them on a new basis. It therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience. What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society has consisted in the development of class antagonisms that assume different forms at different epochs. Whatever form they may have taken, one form is common to all past ages: the exploitation of one part of society by the other. No wonder then that the social consciousness of past ages, despite all the multiplicity and variety it displays, moves within certain common forms or general ideas, which it cannot completely vanish except with the total disappearance of class antagonisms. The communist revolution is one most radical rupture with the traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involves the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. But what does have done with the bourgeois objections to communism? We have seen above that the first step to the revolution by working classes to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling as to win the battle of democracy. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degrees, all capital from the bourgeois, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e. of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to introduce the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads of the property, and the conditions of bourgeois production by means of measures, therefore which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which in the course of the movement outstrip themselves and necessitate further inroads of the old social order, and are unavoidable as means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of reproduction. These measures will of course be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following would be pretty generally applicable: abolition of property in land and application of all rents to land up to public purposes, a heavy progression of or graduated income tax, abolition of all right of inheritance, confiscation of the property of all emigrants and rebels, centralization of the credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly, centralism of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing of cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with common plan, equal liability to all labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country, and more equal distribution of the population all over the country, free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. Doesn't exist, but okay. Combination of education with industrial production. When in the course of development, No, Nate, we are not, we don't do, self-promoting here, even though it's my channel. Even though it's my channel, we're not self-promoting my videos here. Alright, what are we up to? When in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power loses its political power, properly so called, is merely the political character. Political power, properly so called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another, and the proletariat during this contest the bourgeoisie is compelled, by the force of circumstances, to organize itself as a class. If by means of a revolution it makes itself the ruling class, and as such sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with those conditions, have swept away the conditions of production. Then it will, along with those conditions, have swept away the conditions for existence of class antagonisms and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. In place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of the condition is for the free development of all. Alright. We made it to chapter 3. No one is watching anymore. So I'm just gonna take a drink. Okay, we're back. So Nate is back now. Uncle Nate, you're back now. So we just finished chapter 2. We're about to go into chapter 3. So you can have a drink quickly. I'm really just, taking the time to take like a couple of drink of water, because so we're about to, by the way, if something's out of time, like I respond to your chats out of time, it's because my stream's on a bit of a delay. Alright. Alright, so we're on page 26. I just need to page 26 of 39. So you have 13 pages left. So it's going to be like, another half hour? I really don't like saying that. Let's continue, shall we? Let's go. I need to move my mic over a bit, Jeez, I wanna make sure my camera's good. Hold on, let me just. Alright. Right, now we can start chapter 3. Here we go. Chapter 3. Socialist and Communist Literature. Reactionary Socialism. A. Feudal Socialism. Owing to their historical position, it had become the vocation of aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeois society. In the French Revolution of July 1830 and in the English Reform agitation, these aristocracies again succumbed to the hateful upstart. Thenceforth, a serious political contest was altogether out of the question. A literary battle alone remained possible, but even in the domain of literature, the old cries of the Restoration period had become impossible. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy was obligated to lose sight, apparently, of their own interests, and to formulate their own indictment against the bourgeois in the interests of the exploited working class alone. Thus, the aristocracy took their revenge by singeing lampoons on all their new master and whispering in his ears sinister prophecies of the coming catastrophe. In this way arose feudal socialism, half Lamentian, half Lapoon, half echo of the past, half menace of the future, at times by its very better, witty and incisive criticism, striking the bourgeois to the very heart's core, but is always ludicrous in its effort. Through total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history, the aristocracy, in order to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian's alm bag in front of a banner. But the people were so often it joined them, saw in their headquarters the old feudal coats of arms, and deserted with loud and inveterate laughter. One section of the French legitimists and Young England exhibited this spectacle, in pointing out that their mode of exploitation was different to that of the bourgeois. The feudalists forget that they were exploited under circumstances and in conditions that they were quite different, and that are now antiquated, in showing that under their rule, modern proletariat never existed. They forgot that their own modern bourgeois is a necessary offspring for their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of their criticism, that their chief accusation against the bourgeois amounts to this. And pointing out that the mode of exploitation was different to that of the bourgeois, the feudalists forget that they were exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different, and are now antiquated, and showing that under their rule, the modern proletariat never existed. They forget that the modern bourgeois is a necessary offspring of their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of their criticism that their chief accusation against the bourgeois amounts to this: that under the bourgeois regime, a class is being developed, which is destined to cut up root and branch the old order of society. What they upbraid the bourgeois with is not so much that it creates a proletariat, and that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. In political practice, therefore, they will join in all coercive measures against the working class in an ordinary life, despite their highfalutin phrases. They stood to pick up the golden apples dropped from the tree of industry, and to barter truth, love, and honour for traffic in wool, beetroot sugar, and potato spirits. As a person has never gone hand in hand with the landlord, so is clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Nothing is easier than give a Christian's asceticism a socialist tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? Has it not preached the place of those charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification, the flesh monsterly night, and the mother church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart burning of the aristocrat. The feudal petty bourgeois socialism. The feudal aristocracy was not the only class that was ruined by the bourgeois, not the only class whose conditions of existence pined and perished in the atmosphere of the modern bourgeois society. The medieval burgesses and the small peasant proprietors were the precursors of the modern bourgeois. In those countries which are little developed industry and commercially, these two classes still vegetate side by side of the rising bourgeois. In countries where modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of petty bourgeois is formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeois and ever renewing itself as a supplementary part of bourgeois society. The individual members of this class, however, are being constantly held down by the proletariat by the action of competition, and as modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching when they will completely disappear as an independent section of modern society, to be replaced in manufactures, agriculture, and commerce by overlookers, bailiffs, and shopmen. In countries like France, where the peasants can... Oh no, don't go. Goodbye. In countries like France, where the peasants constitute more than half the population, it is natural that writers who sided with the proletariat against the bourgeois should use, in their own criticism of the bourgeois regime, the standard of the peasant and petty bourgeois from the standpoint of these intermediate classes should take up the cudgels of the working class. Thus arose petty bourgeois socialism. Sismondi was the head of this school, not only in France but also in England. The school of socialism dissected with great acuteness the contradictions and the conditions of modern production. It laid bare the hypocritical apologies of economists. It proved incontrovertibly the disastrous effects of machinery and division of labour, the concentration of capital and land in a few hands, overproduction and crises. It pointed out the inevitable ruin of the petty bourgeois and peasant, the misery of the proletariat, the anarchy in production, the crying inequalities of the distribution of wealth, the industrial of extermination between nations, the dissolution of old moral bonds, of the old family relations, and of the old nationalities. In its positive aims, however, this form of socialism aspires to either restoring the old means of production of exchange, and with them the old property relations and the old society, or to cramping the modern means of production and of exchange, within the framework of the old property relations that have been and were bound to be exploited by those means, in other cases both reactionary and utopian. His last words are, corporate guilds for manufacture, patriarchal relations in agriculture. Ultimately, when stubborn historical facts are dispersed all intoxicating effects of self-deprecation, this form of socialism had ended in a miserable fit of the blues. You check my camera's good? Alright. C. German or true socialism. The socialist and communist literature of France, literature that was originated under the pressure of a bourgeois in power, and that was the expression of a struggle against this power, was introduced into Germany at a time when the bourgeois in that country had just begun its contest with feudal absolutism. German philosophers, would-be philosophers, and Bios e-spirits eagerly seized on this literature, only forgetting that when these writings immigrated from France into Germany, German socialist conditions had not immigrated along with them. In contact with German social conditions, this French literature lost all of its immediate practical significance and assumed a purely literary aspect. Thus, for the German philosophers of the 18th century, the demands of the first French Revolution were nothing more than the demands of the practical reason in general. In the utterance of the will, the revolutionary French bourgeois signified in their eyes the law of pure will, of will as bound to be, of true human will generally. The world of the German literature consisted solely in the beginning of new French ideas into harmony with their ancient philosophical conscience, or rather, in annexing the French ideas without deserting their own philosophic point of view. This annexation took place in the same way in which a foreign language is appropriated, namely by translation. How many drop frames have we got? Alright. Sorry that it's like a bit too loud. My live streaming, like OBS tells me it's a bit too loud. So let's continue. It is well known that the monks wrote silly lives of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classical works of Heathendom have been written. The German literate revised this process with the profane French literature. They wrote their philosophical nonsense beneath the French original. For instance, beneath the French criticism of the economic functions of money, they wrote alienation of humanity. And beneath the French criticism of the bourgeois state, they wrote dethronement of the category of the general, and so forth. The introduction of these philosophical phrases at the back of the French historical criticisms they dubbed philosophy of action, true socialism, German science of socialism, philosophical foundation of socialism, and so on. The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated, and since it seized in the hands of the German to express the struggle of one class with another, he felt consciousness of having to overcome French one-sidedness and representing not true requirements but the requirements of truth, not the interests of the proletariat but the interests of human nature, of man in general, who belongs to no class, has no reality, who exists only in the misty realm of philosophical fantasy. This German socialism, which took its schoolboy task so seriously and solemnly, extolled its poor stock in trades in such mountebank fashion, meanwhile gradually lost its pedantic innocence. The fight of the German and especially of the Prussian bourgeois against feudal aristocracy and absolute monarchy, in other words, the liberal movement became more earnest. By this, the long-wished-for opportunity was offered to true socialism of confronting the political movement with the socialist demands of hurling the traditional anathemas against liberalism, against representative government, against bourgeois competition, bourgeois freedom of the press, bourgeois legislation, bourgeois liberty and equality, and of preaching to the masses that they had nothing to gain and everything to lose. By this bourgeois movement, German socialism forgot in the nick of time that the French criticism, whose silly echo was, presupposed the existence of modern bourgeois society with its corresponding economic conditions of existence and a political constitution that adapted thereto. The very things whose attainment was the object of the pending struggle in Germany. To the absolute governments of the struggling of the parsons, professors, country squires, and officials, it served as a welcome scarecrow against the threatening bourgeois. It was a sweet finish after the bitter pills of flogging and billets with these came save governments just at that time, those the German working class risings. While this true socialism thus served the governments as a weapon for fighting the German bourgeoisie, it at the time directly represented a reactionary interest. The interests of the at the same time directly represented each of the German Philistines. In Germany, the petty bourgeois class, a relic of the 20th century, and then, since then constantly cropping up again under the various forms, is the real social bias of the existing state of things. To preserve this class is to preserve the existing state of things in Germany. The industrial and political supremacy of the bourgeois threatens it with certain destruction. On one hand, from the concentration of capital, on the other, from the rise of a revolutionary proletariat. True socialism appeared to kill those two birds with one stone. It spread like an epidemic. The robe of speculative cobwebs, embroidered with flowers of rhetoric, steeped in the dew of sickly sentiment. This transcendental robe in which the German socialists wrapped their sorry eternal truths, all skin and bone, served to wonderfully increase the scale of their goods amongst such a public. And as part, German socialism recognized more and more its own calling as the bombastic representative of the petty bourgeois Philistine. It is proclaimed of the German nation to be the model nation, and the German petty Philistine to be the typical man. To every villainous meanness of this model man is given the hidden higher socialistic interpretation, the exact contrary of its real character, and went to the extreme length of directly opposing the brutally destructive tendency of communism and of proclaiming a supreme and impartial contempt of all class struggles. A very few exceptions, and so the so-called socialist and communist publications that now, in 1847, circulate in Germany belong to the domain of this foul and enervating literature. Alright. So I think we got one more chapter, and then we're good. I've currently spent the last 1 hour and 12 minutes doing this. It is currently 9:30 p.m. right now. I want to go to bed. I mean, I'm not tired. My eyes are tired from reading this. I've never read anything like live before. This is, I'm gonna have to trim this. I have to edit this after. There's no one here that's actually watching this. I mean, there's no one watching this live. I'm gonna re-upload this. I'm gonna re-upload this edited. I'm gonna edit it. So I'm gonna edit out some parts. You know, I mean, I'm not gonna edit out. I'm not gonna edit out any parts that have the book in it. I wanna so I'm just gonna spend a minute just setting up some stream stuff. I'm gonna probably cut this part out in post. So when you're replaying this, you're not gonna be seeing this at all. Alright. So we're back. I had to set up like a little video thing. Alright, we're back. Hopefully no one's gonna see what I did. So let's continue. Conservative or bourgeois socialism. A part of the bourgeois is desirous of redressing social grievances in order to secure the continued existence of bourgeois society. To this section belongs economists, philanthropists, humanitarians, improvers of the condition of the working class, organizers of charity, members of societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals, temperance fanatics, hole-and-corner reformers of every imaginable kind. This form of socialism has, moreover, been worked out into complete systems. We may cite Proudhon's philosophy de la miserie as an example of this form. The socialist bourgeois want all the advantages of modern social conditions without the struggles and dangers necessarily resulting therefrom. They desire the existing state of society minus its revolutionary and disintegrating elements. They wish for a bourgeois without a proletariat. The bourgeois naturally conceives a world in which it is supreme to be the best, and bourgeois socialism develops this comfortable conception into various or more complete systems. In requiring the proletariat to carry out such a system and thereby to match straight away into the social New Jerusalem, it requires in reality that the proletariat should remain within the bounds of existing society, but should cast away all hateful ideas concerning the bourgeois. A second and more practical but less systematic form of the socialism sought to depreciate every revolutionary movement in the guise of the working class by showing that no mere political reform, but only a change in the material conditions of existence in economic relations could be any advantage to them. By changes in the material conditions of existence, this form of socialism, however, by no means understands abolition of the bourgeois relations of production, an abolition that can be effected only by a revolution, by administrative reforms based on the continued existence of these relations, reforms, therefore, that in no respect affect the relations between capital and labour, but at best lessen the costs, and simplify the administrative work of bourgeois government. Bourgeois socialism attains adequate expression when and only when it becomes a mere figure of speech. Free trade for the benefit of the working class, protective duties for the benefit of the working class, and prison reform for the benefit of the working class. This is the last word and only seriously meant word of bourgeois socialism. It is summed up with the phrase, "The bourgeois is a bourgeois for the benefit of the working class." Alright. Critical utopian socialism and communism. We do not refer to that literature in which every great modern revolution has always given voice to the demands of the proletariat, such as the writings of Babeuf and others. The first direct attempts of the proletariat to attain its own ends, make in times of universal excitement when feudal society was being overthrown, these attempts nearly failed, owing to the underdeveloped state of the proletariat, as well as to the absence of the economic conditions of its emancipation, conditions that are yet to be produced, and that could be produced by the impending bourgeois approach alone. The revolutionary literature that accompanied these first few movements of the proletariat had necessarily a reactionary character. It inculcated universal asceticism and social levelling in its crudest form. The socialist and communist systems, probably so called, those of Saint Simon Fourier, Owen and others, sprang into existence in the early undeveloped period described above, of the struggle between proletariat and bourgeois. See section 1, bourgeois and proletariats. The founders of these systems see indeed the class antagonisms as well as the action of developing decomposing elements in the prevailing form of society, but the proletariat, as yet in its infancy, offers them the spectacle of a class without any historical initiative or independent political movement. Since the development of class antagonism keeps even pace with the development of an industry, the economic situation, as they find it, does not yet offer to them the material conditions for an emancipation of the proletariat. They therefore search for a new social science after new social laws that are yet to create these conditions. Historical action is to yield their personal inventive action. Historically created conditions of emancipation to the fantastic ones, and the gradual spontaneous class organization of the proletariat to the organization of society, especially contrived by these inventors, future history resolves itself in their eyes into the propaganda and practical carrying out on their social plans. In the formation of their plans, they are conscious of carrying chiefly for the interests of the working class as being the most suffering class. Only from the point of view from being the most suffering class does the proletariat exist for them. The undeveloped state of the class struggle, as well as their own surroundings, cause the socialists of this kind to consider themselves far superior to all class antagonisms. They want to improve the condition of every member of society, that even the most favoured. Hence, they habitually appeal society to a large, without distinction of class, nay, by preference to the ruling class. For how can people, when once they understand their system, fail to see in the best possible plan of the best possible state of society? Hence, they reject all political and especially all revolutionary action. They wish to attain their ends by peaceful means and endeavour, by small experiments necessarily doomed to failure, and by the force of example to pave the way for a new social gospel. Such fantastic pictures of future society, painted at a time when the proletariat is still a very underdeveloped state and has a fantastic conception of its own position, correspond with the first instinctive yearnings of the class for reconstruction of society. But by these socialist and communist publications contain a critical element. They attack every principle of existing society. Hence, they are full of the most valuable materials for the enlightenment of the working class. The practical measures proposed in them, such as the abolition of distinction between town and country, of the family, of the carrying on of industries for the amount of private industrials, and of the wage system, the proclamation of social harmony, the conversion of the functions of the state into a mere superintendence of class antagonisms, which were at the time only cropping up, and which in these publications are recognized by their earliest instinct and undefined forms only. These proposals, therefore, are of purely utopian character. The significance of critical utopian socialism and communism bears an inverse relation to historical development. In proportion as the modern class struggle develops and takes definite shape, it is fantastic standing apart from the contest. These fantastic attacks on it lose all practical value and all theoretic justification. Therefore, although the originators of these systems were, in many respects, revolutionary, their disciples have, in every case, formed mere reactionary sects. They hold fast by the original views of their masters, in opposition to the progressive historical development of the proletariat. They therefore endeavour, and that constantly, to deaden the class struggle and to reconcile the class antagonisms. As they still dream of experimental realization of their social utopias, of founding land upon Flanders, of establishing home colonies, of setting up a little Icaria, duodecimo editions of the New Jerusalem, and to realize all castles in the air, they are compelled to appeal to all the feelings and purchase of the bourgeois. By degrees, they sink into the category of reactionary conservative socialists, depicted above, differing from these only by a more systematic pedantry and by their fantastical and superstitious belief by the miraculous effects of their own social science. They therefore violently oppose all political action on the part of the working class. Such action, according to them, can only result from the blind unbelief in the new gospel. The Owenites in England and the Fourierites in France respectively oppose the Chariots and Reformists. Position of the communists in relation to the various existing opposition parties. Section 2 has made clear the relations of the communists to the existing working class parties, such as the Chartists in England and the agrarian reformers in America. The communists fight for the attainment of the immediate aims, for the enforcement of the momentarily interests of the working class, but for the movement of the present. And they also represent and take care of the future of that movement. In France, the communists ally themselves with the social democrats against the conservative and take down and radical bourgeois, reserving, however, the right to take a critical position in regard to phrases and illusions traditionally handed down from the Great Revolution. In Switzerland, they support the radicals without losing sight of the fact that this party consists of antagonistic elements, partly of democratic socialists, in the French sense, partly of radical bourgeois. In Poland, they support the party that insists on an agrarian revolution as the prime condition for national emancipation, the party which fomented the insurrection of Krakow in 1846. In Germany, they fight with the bourgeois whether it acts in a revolutionary way, against the absolute monarchy, the feudal squirearchy, and the petty bourgeois. but they never ceased for a single instant to instill the working class the clearest possible recognition of the hostile antagonism between the bourgeois and proletariat. In order that the German workers may straight away use as so many weapons as the bourgeois, the social and political conditions that the bourgeois must necessarily introduce along with its supremacy, in order that after the fall of the reactionary classes in Germany, the fight against the bourgeois itself may immediately begin. The communists turn on their attention chiefly to Germany, because that country is on the eve of a bourgeois revolution that is bound to be carried out under more advanced conditions of European civilization, of a more developed proletariat, and that of England was in the 17th and of France in the 18th century. And because of the bourgeois revolution in Germany will be the prelude to an immediately following proletarian revolution. In short, the communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things. In all these movements, they bring to the front as their leading question in each the property question, no matter what its degree of development at the time. Finally, they labor everywhere for the union and agreement of the democratic parties of countries. The communists deciding to conceal their views and aims, to openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions, that the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries, unite! And that is the end of the book. We have finished the Communist Manifesto today. We actually finished it today. So what did it take? It took 90 minutes. It took almost 90 minutes. Like, that's a full-on movie. So to sign off, I'm going to be playing the Soviet National Anthem. See you guys next video, I guess.